to the Scottish Affairs Committee from the lovely environment of the Royal Concert Hall here in Glasgow. We're here today to look at some of the preparations around COP26, which we know is only a week away, and I think we're all thoroughly looking forward to it. We're delighted to be joined today by a panel who will introduce themselves, and belatedly by Glasgow City Council leader, Councillor Susan Aitken. So what we'll do, we'll go from you, Councillor Aitken, and if everybody could just please introduce yourself and say who you represent. Councillor Aitken.
Susan Aitken, leader of Glasgow City Council.
I'm Colin Edgar. I'm Head of Communication at Glasgow City Council and the Council's Senior Responsible Officer for COP.
I'm Kat Jones. I work for Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, and I've been their lead on COP organising on the logistics side.
I'm Janice Fisher, co-chair of the Greater Glasgow Hotels Association.
Grateful, thank you very much. I think you've already learned just about pressing those little buttons in the middle to make sure that your microphones are active, and if you just maybe turn it off if you're not going to be speaking. So if we get things started, and it's to you, Councillor Aitken, could you just sort of maybe just tell the committee where we are, if your expectations have been met about the planning and preparation for a huge event such as this? And maybe in your response, could you tell us how well you feel you've been supported by Scottish and UK government in your efforts to make sure that Glasgow plays the host to this big conference? Councillor Aitken.
So I can literally say that at the operational board, which I don't attend, by the way, I should say the operational side of things is much more my officer colleagues' responsibility, and for some of the detail, my colleague Colin will be able to update you on that. But certainly the COP board, COP26 board within the council that met last week, the verdict was that we are ready with caveats. I would say the caveats are mainly technical. Some of them have already been resolved. They're being ticked off. None of them were massive. None of them were enough to cause panic, I should say. I think, you know, I certainly haven't, in my time in this job, been involved with an event of this size and scale, but then again, nobody has in Scotland or even really in the UK. So we are all on a learning curve, but certainly big events, there are always last-minute issues. The added layer of the pandemic has clearly complicated things more, and I'm sure that's a theme that you'll hear. No, we are. We believe that we're in a good place. Glasgow is very good at hosting big events. We are, I would say, we're the best city in the UK at doing it. We are one of the best in the world. Indeed, we got an award a couple of years ago for being the best events and festivals city globally. Our conventions bureau, who have done a lot of the work, have won Best Conventions Bureau in the UK like 13 years running or something. Colleagues like Colin and others in the council have experience of the Commonwealth Games, of the Glasgow, the 2018 European Championships. So we, and I would say colleagues at the SEC, which is a world-class venue and a big part of the reason why Glasgow was chosen as host city, also highly experienced. So there is a great deal of experience in the city. There are very strong partnerships in the city to deliver an event like this. And I would say that the relations between the council and primarily the UK government, that's been the main relationship in terms of planning, have been very good. They've been very positive. And you know, still, as always, some minor details to work through this week, but as I say, nothing overwhelming. Relationships with Scottish Government also good, and I attended, along with some officer colleagues just last week, in fact, a tripartite session specifically on public health with the UK Government in London, ourselves in Glasgow City Chambers, and a team from in St Andrew's House as well from the Scottish Government, which was very much focused on partnership, delivery and response. Scottish Government and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, I should say, partnership, delivery and response to any issues that might emerge around public health.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Given the short time, I'll just go pass straight on to my colleague John Lamont. John.
Morning.
Councillor Aitken, I'd be grateful if your answers just could be a bit shorter because we're all quite keen to ask questions in the time available to us. Can I ask you about rubbish and graffiti? There's obviously quite a lot of coverage in the press around the condition of the city ahead of COP. Can you just give us an assessment of how you think the city is currently looking?
We are recovering from the impact of the pandemic on our services at pace now, I would say. It has been extremely challenging. It's been a challenge that all cities have faced globally. I think while public services generally have been impacted by the pandemic, cleansing services in particular have been very strongly impacted. Glasgow hasn't been the worst impacted in Scotland or the UK. The worst city, I think perhaps because of COP, there has been a particular focus on us. But we have an operational plan in place which is moving at pace. I'm happy to, I'll just very quickly run through some of the key points on that. So there's an overarching environmental plan for the entire city to recover from the impact of COVID. Because of staff absences in particular, some services had to be withdrawn, but also because of managing public health among our impact among our existing staff. So those are all back in place, and there's been catching up being done, if you like. So graffiti is a good example. That was one area where, for a period of the pandemic, really that service had to go by the wayside because the focus was on domestic refuse. As you might imagine, that was the #1 priority. That's now back on track. Initial focus has been on removing homophobic and racist graffiti. There's been a big lot of work done on the COP zones in the past few weeks. Very challenging because there is re-offending, shall we say, and there's no question that vandalism has increased over the period of the pandemic, and that's something that we're having to deal with. We've spent over and above the work that we've been doing just to get our services back for the whole city. We've worked an additional 12,000 hours on the programme to prepare the city for COP. And I'll not go into more detail than that. I'm conscious of the of time. But just one example. For example, we've got 150 new litter bins being deployed. A whole number of interventions that have gone in place.
So I spent 4 happy years at Glasgow University, and I went for a walk yesterday when I arrived here just to see the condition of the city. And I've got pictures on my phone of refuge and tyres, lying around on the riverside, walking towards the venue. Coming in the train at Garrow Hill, I could see piles of rubbish lying by bins. Do you have any sense of embarrassment that the international world is going to be looking at Glasgow and Scotland, and this is the condition of Glasgow City?
I'm never embarrassed about Glasgow. I am occasionally frustrated by some...
Sorry, not embarrassed by Glasgow. Do you feel any sense of embarrassment personally that you've allowed the city to fall into this state of disrepair and condition?
I think that's entirely gratuitous, I have to say. I've explained the very serious challenges that this city, along with others... I was in London a couple of weeks ago for the first time since the pandemic, and I have to say I had a phone full of pictures of rubbish as well.
Glasgow's hosting COP26.
Indeed, and London is the capital of the UK and hosts people from the world all the time. Edinburgh, according to Keep Scotland Beautiful, Edinburgh was actually worse impacted by these issues during the pandemic, but I don't recall anyone saying Edinburgh should be embarrassed to have the festival. We are, as are other cities globally, working to address the very serious challenges and impacts that were caused by the pandemic, that we were never going to be able to recover overnight from the impact of our services on the city. I believe we are making considerable progress. We are working round the clock to address those issues, particularly in the COP zones in the city, but actually right across the city, because I want to be absolutely clear that our services are not just for VIPs coming to Glasgow. We're not working to have our services recover from that impact of COVID just because Joe Biden's coming to town. We're doing it for our citizens because actually our services are for them first and foremost. So no, I'm not embarrassed. I'm confident that the visitors coming to Glasgow will see, as they always see, an incredibly vibrant, diverse and welcoming urban space.
Thank you. I'm just very conscious of time, and I know we've got to let you away at 5:30. Councillor Aiken. Deidre Brock.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome, Susan. It's good to see you here today. Thank you very much for making time for us. Can I just ask, the Scotsman on October 17th reported that public bodies and government agencies were getting a UK government COP26 dividend. But most of that nearly £100 million seemed in fact to be compensation for the costs of staging the conference and for all the extra work for health and emergency services such as Police Scotland, Public Health Scotland, Transport Scotland, for example, are going to have to deal with the nearly 30,000 extra visitors that are expected in Glasgow. Now, it was suggested in that article, though, that the Glasgow City Council was not covered by that agreement. Is that still the case?
We have an agreement on full cost recovery with the UK government. We are, I believe, Colin will be able to give more detail on this, but certainly in the most recent briefings I've had, which were from just the end of last week, we were on track to match the budget that we had predicted. There have been, particularly around the use of other venues in the city, which is considerable, as you might imagine, some emerging costs which haven't been finally agreed yet, but we're working to sign off agreement on those just now.
Okay.
So we fully expect to have full cost recovery, and obviously the city isn't in a position to carry the costs of an event which is a UK government hosted event. So we would fully expect that. In terms of wider legacy, certainly I have done a great deal of work as leader of the city to make sure that Glasgow is ready to benefit from being the host city of COP. I would say I would very much welcome a commitment from the UK government perhaps to work with us on some of the sustainability projects that we've identified, which are absolute exemplars that would lead the way in the UK. We haven't finalised that yet, but it has been something that I've put very much on the agenda with Alok Sharma in my discussions with them. Okay.
Colleague Alison Theolis raised the issue of businesses not having yet received compensation as they'd been assured from the President-designate over disruption to business over the period of this next fortnight. Are you, or even around that, are you aware of what's happening in there in that particular?
I'm going to have to defer to my colleague on that very much, the operational side.
That's fine. I can maybe ask Mr. Egger that later.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and nice to see you, Councillor Aiken. I saw an article in The Guardian on Saturday where a local business was quoted as saying, "We are well informed, but we still don't know what's going to happen." Given that we are looking at bus and rail strikes, for example, what are the Council doing in these last days to make sure that the information businesses have is giving them the confidence to do what needs to be done?
So we have our Get Ready Glasgow website, which is receiving a very large number of visitors for businesses and citizens. That's a brand that's well known in the city. It's been used twice before, first of all for the Commonwealth Games. We've also hosted a number of seminars for businesses jointly with our Chamber of Commerce, Police Scotland and other partners. Those have been very well attended. I think it's fair to say none of us know exactly quite what's going to happen because we have never hosted an event of this scale and size before. We can plan as much as possible, but crucially what we have in place is responses to things. You know, I think that's the important part, is there will be things that emerge that we didn't predict because it's impossible to predict everything. The key is to make sure that you've got the partnerships and the structures and the systems in place to respond to unexpected things.
So you're confident in the flexibility of your planning?
Absolutely, we're confident in the flexibility of our planning, and our very strong message has been to businesses that undoubtedly there's going to be disruption. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Of course there's going to be disruption in the city, but we are very much open for business, and we have done everything within our power to make sure that we are open for business as a city. Strikes, and unfortunately they're beyond our power and beyond our remit as a city council. Obviously, and no doubt you'll have seen news coverage, Scottish Government is working very hard to try and find an agreement with the RMT, and I hope that it's not too late for that to happen. But these are national issues. What we will do is put whatever measures we are able to in place to mitigate the impact of any strikes on either the event or just on generally how the city is running, as we would do in a normal time as well.
And given that COP is obviously about, you know, a big part around sustainability and what we do, is it disappointing for you that at a national level we've not been able to seek an agreement on public transport from a strike perspective?
Of course it's disappointing. I would much rather there wasn't a public transport or a possibly public transport strikes. I'm not going to you know, give into the assumption that it will definitely happen yet. Yes, it will be very disappointing. I think Scotland's railway and indeed bus services have had a lot of investment to decarbonise them, to make them a genuinely sustainable mode of transport. It would be good if the delegates to COP and the visitors were able to experience that, and I hope that that will still be the case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Andrew Bowie.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Councillor Aiken. Thank you for joining us. Next week, 30,000 people descending on Glasgow obviously presents a huge opportunity for Glasgow's hospitality sector, but also a huge challenge. Added to that is the challenge that the hospitality sector face of enforcing the new vaccine passport scheme. But delegates to the conference won't be required to have the vaccine passport. And I just wondered, given the difficulties in enforcement anyway, how are you, or what discussions have you had with the hospitality sector in Glasgow to support them over the coming weeks, differentiating between COP delegates who don't need the vaccine passport and ordinary Glaswegians who do, and what support will be given to the sector in order to go about their business? So again, on the direct issues of support, I'll defer to operational colleagues on that. There have been ongoing for a number of months now, discussions among the partnerships in the city around these aspects. What I would say is that the public health protocols that are in place for delegates are more, they go further than the public health protocols for local people. And that is something that we were absolutely adamant about from the outset, that there couldn't be a situation where, you know, had we been, for example, still at a point where Glaswegians weren't able to drink alcohol with a meal, that there couldn't be a situation where delegates could, and there was a gap there. So in actual fact, delegates do have to go further. So there's daily testing. There will be still be 1 metre distancing in the venue, and all the venues, hospitality venues. Our environmental health teams have been working really, really closely with them and will continue to do so. You know, I think it's fair to say that Glasgow had probably a greater impact of COVID than anywhere else in Scotland, in actual fact anywhere else outside of London, in terms of the economic impact, and that's ongoing. And our hospitality venues, the work that they did to get themselves into the right place to support the economic recovery of the city and the reopening of the city even before COP was superb. They did a fantastic job. I think they're very well prepared. Undoubtedly, there will still be challenges. You know, there are people coming from all over the world. The communication of the protocols has been very strict, but you know, we can probably assume that there will be some people who don't adhere to them. What I would say is that our venues have got a lot of experience in dealing with that over the past few months. But the UN obviously are, you know, we're looking to them to enforce. The delegates are their delegates. We're looking to them to enforce very, very strongly. But our environmental health teams on the ground are the eyes and ears of what's happening, and they'll be supporting the venues throughout the city. Thank you, Councillor. I'll come back to vaccine passports later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned in response to the Chair that Glasgow is ready for COP, bar some technical issues. Is it technical issues that the bins are overflowing, there's rats on the streets, and some of your employees have been taken to hospital while they've been collecting that rubbish? Are those the technical issues you mean?
No, and again, I would say that's completely gratuitous. And,
sorry, that is happening though, isn't it?
No.
So your employees haven't been taken to hospital while they've been collecting rubbish?
There are
no bins overflowing, there are no rats in the streets in Glasgow. You've just said that that's incorrect.
I've already described at some length the issues and challenges that we as a city, in common with cities right across this these islands,
is that
and
happening
indeed
or
right
not?
across the
Sorry,
world,
just be
have
clear,
experienced as a result of the
chair
pandemic.
is understandably very strict. You've told us in evidence to a parliamentary committee that is not happening. You said in response to me,
there have been.
So
I
have
think
your employees been taken to hospital while they've been collecting rubbish? Are there overflowing
if you would-
bins
if you
and
would
are
let me
there
answer,
rats in our streets?
Just order. Just a minute.
There have been, there was, I think, one, possibly two at most, small incidents where an employee, where there was a health and safety incident, and an employee was taken as a precaution to hospital for what was very minor contact with a rat. I have to say, it's not unheard of. And it hasn't been unheard of for decades that our cleansing employees occasionally come into, occasionally experience rats. It's also not something that is unique to Glasgow. It's something that's happening right across the UK. All cities have rats. And there is evidence just now that there has been an increase of around 25% in the rat population during the pandemic. All cities are struggling with this right now. You know, you could look at the headlines of any local paper and find similar issues.
Okay, well,
what I would say is that we treat any health and safety issue with our employees extremely seriously.
Okay, just on that point, I'm not sure.
We treat them with an abundance of caution. In the incidents that happened, there were immediate reviews of PPE, whether the PPE was being deployed correctly at the time, whether we had to, as a council, operationally enhance the PPE that our operatives use. All of that work was done. It is not something that's actually been repeated, to my knowledge. In fact, the last briefing I got, I think there had been something like 5 reports of contact between cleansing operatives. No, I'm sorry, you made a number of allegations, Mr Ross. I think I'm entitled to answer them
sorry, Councillor Aitken,
comprehensively.
Sorry,
Order, right. Yeah. What we do here is we ask questions and then our guests respond to them. And I think Councillor Aitken had finished.
Yes.
Now back to you, Mr Ross.
Thank you. Because, I mean, people will be watching this and hearing Councillor Aitken saying on one hand she takes all these issues seriously, yet apparently the person only had minor contact with a rat. I don't know how you go from minor to major contact with a rat, but if the person ended up in hospital, I would expect the leader of Glasgow City Council to take that more seriously. Can I move on to the issue of...
I just said I take it extremely seriously, and the fact that they were taken to hospital
we've
was demonstrating an abundance of caution in response to that health and safety incident at work.
Councillor Aitken, do you regret any of your previous comments? You've been widely ridiculed across the United Kingdom for saying Glasgow only needs a spruce up, it's not actually filthy. Do you now, in hindsight, having made those comments and seeing what Glaswegians felt about those comments, regret them?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Because I would never ever use the kind of language about this city that you are using right now.
I'm not using
I would
these...
never, I am,
Chair.
you know, I do not in any way shy away from the challenges that we face as a city. Historic challenges that have been around for many, many years, much of them a legacy of our post-industrial past when the Thatcher government walked away and abandoned and left in neglect communities right across this city.
Sorry, Councillor Aitken, you've answered the question.
By the
right, okay, order. Right. Again, we're going to try this. We'll ask questions and we'll answer them. So, Douglas, please ask a question and then let Councillor Aitken answer.
I did get the answer, and Councillor Aitken doesn't regret any of the comments she's made that have been widely ridiculed, and I think that's shameful. Can I ask what direct discussions you've had with the First Minister of Scotland? Understandably, this is a UK government conference that has come here because of the United Kingdom government, but the local issues, the rubbish collection, the rail chaos, the potential for road chaos, these are issues that are devolved to the Scottish Government and the responsibility of the current SNP Scottish Government. What direct conversations have you had with the First Minister about these issues?
I've been having regular conversations with a number of colleagues in the Scottish Government who have direct responsibility for those issues.
But the First Minister has shown an interest and she's been involved.
The First Minister has shown an interest, and I have fairly regular contact with the First Minister. But we've already identified that the rail issues, for example, are national issues. They're not local issues. Our cleansing services are our local operational issues, and we have. I'm happy. I'm sure you don't want to know, but I've touched already on the extremely extensive work that has gone on and has been put in place to respond to the challenges that we face as a result of the pandemic that all cities across the UK are facing. And we continue to do that.
And that's my
I
final
also
question.
have, for example, regular contact with Michael Matheson, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero in the Scottish Government. But you correctly identify COP26 as a UK government issue, so a UK government hosted event. So any particular support that we require to host COP26 is a matter for the UK government, not the Scottish government.
And my final question, you mentioned other councils. Do you not think it's a bit sad, really, that we now have a competition between two SNP-led councils in Scotland, Glasgow and Edinburgh, which one's the dirtiest? That's been your argument now a number of times. Indeed, today, you mentioned it in evidence session. Is that not a sad reflection of where we are, that the two SNP-run councils in the biggest cities in Scotland are arguing amongst each other about who's the dirtiest?
Well, I could easily also point to the Conservative-run Westminster Council in London, for example, which...
You're the leader of Glasgow City Council. You have used an analogy of Edinburgh City Council, which is also led by your party. Well, it was actually Keep Scotland Beautiful did that But you
work.
repeated it at the committee today.
Yes, I did, and
so that's a competition in Scotland.
I did so to create to make the point that as I say, gratuitous, and I don't know whether it's Mr. Ross's habit, is when he's going round the country, either with the Scottish Affairs Select Committee or just on his own, to just kind of insult the place and the people that he's attending in the place that he's attending, but or if he's just saved it up for Glaswegians. The point I'm making that this is not unique to Glasgow. And what I reject entirely are suggestions that Glasgow is somehow particular in this, that it is peculiarly challenged in relation to any of these things, which seems to be what Douglas Ross is suggesting.
Right,
this is only
your
about
order,
Glasgow.
your responsibility.
We've had enough of this. Thank you very
you,
much
Chair.
for the useful exchange. Thank you. Sally Ann Hart with the last question for Councillor Aitken.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Councillor
Morning.
Aitken. I just wanted to ask about public engagement and communication. So we know that the UK government and the Scottish governments have engaged with the public nationally. For example, we've got the COP26 skills pack for schools in England and I presume in Scotland. But I wondered what communication and engagement has been done locally. So, for example, what's Glasgow City Council? Does it have a responsibility to communicate with people locally?
Well, certainly, yeah, we take that responsibility very seriously. I mean, I think we've the work that we've done has been very much complementary to and above and beyond what the UK government has been doing. I think it's fair to say it's been much more focused on Glasgow and on what this means for the city and what the legacy would be for the city. So we've done a number of things. We had a citizens' assembly specifically on COP26 and on climate change and what that means for the city. We took that report to committee last week. Really, really strong recommendations from there. Very much focused on just transition as being something that's really important to citizens. The work that we've done in schools has been absolutely brilliant. I don't want to say too much about it because it's being unveiled later this week and it's going to look absolutely fantastic. In fact, just when I was heading over here, the officer in our education department who's been leading on that work, I bumped into her and she showed me a little video of children across the city singing a specially composed song for COP26, which was lovely, and people will see that later this week. We are doing work in communities, particularly so we have an artists in residence programme here in the city. We're using our artists in residence to engage directly with communities to try and understand, get their sense of what climate change and the response to the climate emergency means for them in their local places. I think, we've been engaging at both a local, a national and an international level as a city. As the host city, we are, and Christiana Figueres, the former head of the UN Climate Agency identified this, that Glasgow is a city in transition. You know, we were a post-industrial city, we are now transitioning to decarbonise and addressing all of the challenges that a post-industrial city has. That's something that has to be meaningful to our own citizens, to our own residents, that they understand what our response, what climate action means for them in their day-to-day lives. But it's also had a very strong resonance, I think, with the international engagements that I've had, particularly with other city leaders around the world. So our engagements have happened at every level, but our engagements with our own residents are always the most important and the ones that will continue long after the kind of COP circus has left town, if you like.
Thank you. I don't know if you've got time for one last question from Mary Black.
Yes,
you
sure,
have, right?
yes,
Okay, Mary.
Just a very quick question, and I'll ask more about it later. But of course, with the Homestay programme, we've seen Glaswegians open up their homes to delegates and so on. Have there been any lessons learned so that in the future, when Glasgow hosts events, we won't necessarily run into the same problems of having to ask people to open up their own homes?
So I think you're going to hear from our colleagues in the from the accommodation and hotel sector later. This was a unique situation. Ultimately, it was the responsibility of the UK government to secure accommodation, and I think there will be lessons learned at that level. I think we have a lot of experience in doing it in Glasgow for previous events, but what I would say is that this is a different kind of event. So a lot of the people who are coming, I think there's been some confusion. Some of the media have been reporting that delegates have been looking for accommodation. Delegates have their accommodation. I think we need to be clear about that. And delegates from the Global South and from poorer countries have that paid for. The UN has paid for that, crucially important. But there are a lot of people coming maybe to protest, just to take part in activism, to take part in the big climate march that's going to be on the 6th of November, for example. And those are perhaps a different kind of person than would come to Glasgow. They're not coming as tourists, as maybe folk coming to the Commonwealth Games would. So the Homestay programme is a different kind of response to a different kind of accommodation need, if you like. And I think it's probably it will be tested out, I think it's fair to say, and we'll see how it goes. But I think if it goes well, it might be something that the city could consider using in future for other kinds of events. Having said that, we will never host another COP or something like that. This one is once in a lifetime, absolutely unique. And probably for the UK, not just for Glasgow.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Aitken, for joining us. I know it was at the last minute, and I know you're very, very busy, but the committee is very grateful for you coming along, and we'll let you off and get on with running this city. But thank you for your attendance this morning.
Thank you.
We can perhaps redistribute some of the microphones for our remaining panellists. We'll get the rest of the session underway. And perhaps to you first, Mr. Edgar, there was a number of issues that we touched on briefly with Councillor Aitken, and perhaps you could maybe fill in some of the spaces that was left out. And I think most notably amongst them was the support you've had from government, both UK and Scottish, in order to assist with the planning and designing of this conference, and also some of the business support. I think we were starting to get into that, so I'll maybe let you explain to us where we are with that and any of the issues you've identified.
Okay, so I think one of the questions was about the budget recovering the cost of delivering the event. There was a question about businesses being compensated, a question about engaging with hospitality businesses on vaccine passports, and I can pick up anything else after that, Chair. So in terms of cost recovery, the government has an approval process, a spending approval board that we regularly speak to. The spending which is approved as of right now is not at the same level as the expenditure that we expect to incur, but I'm relaxed about that. The government have approached this in a spirit of partnership up until now, and they've not quibbled unnecessarily over expenditure. They want to see that we've actually spent the money that we are claiming from them, and that's perfectly reasonable. So I expect that in the wash-up after the event, I think we might spend slightly less than we budgeted for, and I think we'll...
I'm sure they'll be glad to hear that.
Yes, yes. And I think we'll come in there or thereabouts, so I'm pretty confident about that. Businesses being compensated, so the government have been clear on, we've run a series of business engagement sessions which have been attended by several hundred businesses. They've all been run online rather than in person, which is one of the reasons that we are spending less than we thought we would. The government have been clear that businesses who are directly affected by being inside the outer security perimeter would be compensated. I haven't heard directly that that's not happening. But that doesn't mean it definitely is. I just haven't heard that it's not. But they have committed to it, and they have committed to it in front of the businesses who were asking about it. In terms of engaging hospitality businesses in regard to vaccine passports, the vaccine passport process has only been enforced now for a week. I know that some businesses are not keen on it. My colleagues in environmental health report that businesses in Glasgow are ready for it. I have to say businesses in Glasgow have been exceptionally good at following the rules all the way through the pandemic. We took an approach whereby right at the start we ranked every licensed business in the city by who we thought were least likely to stick to the rules. So we visited them in ascending order of expected compliance, and actually there was very little non-compliance, so I expect that this will be the same. In terms of delegates, they'll have accreditation that demonstrates that they are a delegate and therefore exempt. I don't know exactly how businesses are planning to deal with that, but I can take some advice, if it's okay with the chair, from colleagues and write to the committee to set that out. And I think that was it, Chair.
Yeah, I think that, and thank you for that. And we'd be very grateful if you could give us that information, because I think just in terms of the overall planning for the next week, that's quite important. The one issue that seems to have emerged, and we've been hearing from Councillor Aitken just about some of the unexpected things that might arise. And I think the one that's most notable today is the number of cases and the concerns just about the pandemic and the fact that there may be a spike as an outcome of this COP26. I'm just wondering, is there any provisions that Glasgow City Council have made for this, if there's any further mitigation features that you're planning to introduce and put in place while this is going on, and just what your assessment is of a possibility of a further spike coming our way?
Certainly it's something that everyone should be very cautious about. The Leader of the Council set out the rules that the Government and the UN are imposing on delegates, and they are going to be very, very strict with them, and they're very clear they'll debadge them, is the expression they use. So even down to, for example, you're not allowed to move the chairs in the meeting rooms, that sort of thing. 30,000 people is a relatively big number, but it's half a decent attendance at Ibrox. These are crowds that we are used to managing in the city, and that's not to downplay the risk of that at all. The wider number of people coming in are people who are coming in to have their voice heard, who are coming in to protest, who are coming in to make their views known. And the UN certainly regard that as an important part of the process, and Dr. Jones would regard that as an extremely important part of the process as well. The climate march on the 6th of November is expected to be somewhere between 100 and 150,000. Sounds like a big number. Previous COPs, I think, have been up towards 500,000 or so. Yeah. So I think we're going to have far fewer people coming because of the restrictions that are placed on travel and so forth than you would expect to have. I know that colleagues in public health are thinking very hard about how to mitigate it, and as I said before, our colleagues in environmental health are doing a lot of work with restaurants, bars, the kind of premises that people are going to go to just to make sure they're on top of the COVID processes. So in terms of the legal restrictions on people, the council, it's not open to the council to impose any new restrictions, but I'm confident that the governments working together have a plan for minimising the risk insofar as that's possible.
And just if you feel you could help us with this, Dr. Jones, have you any expectations and numbers coming? I know we've got the big demonstration on the 6th of November, and of course the UN have said that this is a democratic right for everybody to appear and be present if they want. And could you maybe help us just what you anticipate in terms of numbers coming to the city?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing since the pandemic became a big issue is encouraging people to mobilise close to where they live. So we have been saying to people, and it isn't ourselves at Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, it's the COP26 Coalition who are organising the march. They have made it clear that people should be organising marches in their own cities. And so there's a big one in London, and there are marches all over the place. I heard about one in Truro happening, you know, so there's literally marches close to where people live. So this is one of the reasons we're expecting it not to be so big. Also, we're really encouraging people not to travel to Glasgow unless they've got confirmed accommodation. And what Councillor Aitken said there about all delegates having accommodation is not true. There are thousands of delegates who don't have accommodation because often these badges aren't given out until a few weeks beforehand, and most of the accommodation was booked in Glasgow months and months ago. And so a lot of these delegations that are coming from far afield have to wait until they have the number of badges to book the accommodation, to book the travel, and that's only happening over the last couple of weeks. So, you know, we've had contacts from many delegates, many, and even official delegations from countries who are not finding accommodation are getting in touch with us. So, you know, this is definitely an accommodation crisis we've got. But in terms of people travelling, perhaps 100,000 for the march, but what we're trying to get out there is travel if you can get to Glasgow and back in a day. You know, so if you live in Scotland, if you live in Northern England, you know, if you can travel back and forth in a day, or you've got accommodation, come and take part. But otherwise, mobilise close to where you live.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose we should come to you, Ms Fisher, just on some of the accommodation-related issues. As bad as we're hearing, there's just nothing left available in Glasgow. What's your advice to people who may be thinking about coming to the city, you know, as part of one of the demonstrations or fringe activities? What is the situation? Give us your view.
Well, on behalf of the Hotels Association, I can only speak to those members. And MCI were appointed the accommodation provider, both jointly by the UK government and the UN. They had a mandate to secure 15,000 rooms on behalf of the UN so that they could be distributed across the piece. Within 2 miles of the exhibition centre, there is actually only 9,750 bedrooms of hotel accommodation available. Within 20 miles, that increases to 14,399. MCI only secured 1/3 of that accommodation because they were asked to secure accommodation in other parts of the country as well to encourage a range of offers, a range of pricing, and also Edinburgh is only 45 minutes from Glasgow. So in Paris, for example, delegates were quite happy to move and take transport that was an hour away from the venue. So we have a range of offers there for everyone. The Homestay network that Mary mentioned is a very important part of that. Of course it is. But also we have other options of accommodation such as Airbnb, which is very well known, and other types of accommodation of that ilk. I've also seen campsites available. So, I do take on board the fact that there perhaps isn't enough official accommodation within the campus itself to accommodate everyone. But I would encourage anyone who wants to come, as Dr. Jones has said, you know, if it's safe to do so, then please do come. But I'm sure there will still be a lot of support online for people that want to take part in the event itself.
Excellent, thank you. I'm grateful for that. John Lamont.
My question's to Colin Edgar. With a week to go, what's keeping you awake at night? What are you anxious about?
The short answer is everything. Last night I was worried about transport this morning, but the transport network seems to be going okay this morning. I think the thing I'm nervous about is that there is going to be disruption for everyone who lives in the city, and for some people who live in the immediate vicinity, there's going to be really serious disruption on a couple of days. That will be balanced out by an ambitious and deliverable deal which will allow the city to position itself as the world leader in the modern businesses and technologies and investment that will come from that. I think there is going to be the opportunity coming from this for the city to sell itself and that will have, in the medium and long term, real implications for jobs and education in the city. So what really keeps me awake is that we don't get that deal that allows the city to build on that. Every city in the world is going to be talking to investors and businesses in the next few years saying, we are the place to come to, we understand these new industries, we have the graduates, we have the people. My hope is that Glasgow doesn't have to do that, because our name's going to be on the deal and everyone will know that. So in the long term, the world needs a deal, but Glasgow needs a deal, and it not being worth the effort is the thing that makes me most nervous. Not because I don't think we'll get there, it's just when you imagine the things that can go wrong, that's the top of my list.
Okay, thank you. And we've heard this morning already about the possibility of industrial action, how that might impact on trains and other services. Have you got a plan B in place if you have some sort of catastrophic sort of fallout as a consequence of the industrial action? Do you have some sort of contingency plan to deal with that?
If the traffic system collapses for any reason, because of snow or something, you don't have replacement traffic systems. I don't mean in Glasgow, I mean anywhere. So if the rail strike goes ahead, the fallback position has to be for people to, again, take further steps to change how they travel. So what we've tried to do, there was a question about communication, and the bulk of our communication work with citizens has been around about giving them the tools they need to plan about how their life is going to change. The road closures are relatively limited, but they have a very big and wide impact. So we've given people day-by-day maps showing which roads are closed, what the diversions are, what the active travel diversions are, but also which routes are going to be particularly busy. If there are no trains, the trains can't be replaced. They're either there or they're not. What we'll need to do is say to people, look, this is happening. If your plan was to leave the car and get on the train, you're going to have to come up with another plan. Here are some options. If it's a short journey, here are the active travel routes you might use. Here are the bus routes you might use. The bus network is not yet completely full, but no, we can't. If the trains aren't there, there's no way to replace them.
So if the train strike goes ahead and there's queues of people at the station unable to get to work, long queues,
yeah.
What's advice?
Well, I would hope if there's no trains running, people won't go to the stations. So we'll try and make sure that people understand that if the train strike goes ahead and there's no trains, we'll try to communicate with people so that they understand that, look, tomorrow is Tuesday, there is a train strike, please don't go to the station. So our plan would be to communicate with people, to ask them not to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, witnesses. Good to have you here, and Mr Edgar, good to see you again. One of the things Councillor Aiken mentioned was obviously the city's experience in dealing with major events. What lessons from 2014 and 2018 have you applied in your planning for COP to Mr Edgar, please?
I think I'd probably talk about transport again, but as I said, it's top of my mind today, because today's the first day of the closures. There was a perception that the transport plan around the London Olympics succeeded because they scared people out of the city. Now, I don't know whether that's correct or not, but it certainly is a perception. The Chamber of Commerce and the business community in Glasgow in this last decade has been very keen with us that we don't scare people out of the city in order to make it a success. So that was pretty risky going into 2014, because the travel demand planners tell you, now, they don't say scare people out of the city, but what they tell you is you need to encourage people not to come in, not just to remode, to take a bike instead of the car, or to take a bus instead of the car, but actively to encourage people not to come. We were very forceful with the organising committee that mustn't be the case. We had won that argument by the time the European Championships came round in 2018, but the risk is greater this time. So we have stuck to the view that we are not trying to scare people out of the city, but this is going to be a much bigger test than 2014 and 2018. But what we learned is that people can change their behaviour. It's greatly to be hoped that they can change their behaviour on a bigger scale this time than they did in 2014. So that was the biggest learning. I think second to that, I would say volunteers. The Commonwealth Games, the volunteering scheme in the Commonwealth Games was much more like an employment type process. We wanted to try and bring in people who were much further from the job market, In 2014, we ran a parallel volunteering scheme, but in 2018 and this year, and when it comes through to the World Cycling Champs in 23, we've run a volunteering scheme which has much more detailed KPIs about people who are from black and minority ethnic communities, from lower socioeconomic communities, to use it as a tool to get people closer to the job market. So that's been successful.
So it's a different model.
Yes.
My mum was a volunteer in 2014, so it's good to hear that. One of the things that Councillor Aiken said, and actually you said as well in response to John Lamont, was about disruption, that acknowledgement that COP is bringing disruption, and the quid pro quo of that is the medium to longer term offers. That sense of disruption is coming through quite strongly, but I suppose, what's your feeling from businesses? Are they recognising the opportunities, or is there, again, a degree of ambivalence?
I don't think there's ambivalence. No, Glaswegians are never ambivalent, I have to say, about anything. Well, every one of these events is a disaster until it happens, and then it's not a disaster. The Chamber of Commerce are confident that there is that simply having this many tens and hundreds of thousands of people in the city will be a boost to businesses in the city, and certainly will be a boost to the hotel and entertainment sectors. The city's plan to grow on the back of this, our green investment portfolio, our Glasgow Green Deal, have been designed in concert with the Chamber of Commerce and the business community in the city, and they're confident, like me, that a good deal is something that Glasgow can build on. A good deal is vital for all of us who live on this planet, but if I'm going to be parochial for a second, it's something that Glasgow can build on.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm conscious that my majority of my questions to Mr Edgar, I've got one more and then I'll move elsewhere. But in terms of that compensation, what we talked about was the fact that those businesses were in the blue zone, were being compensated, and that you were confident that the government, the UK government, was working constructively on that regard. I suppose just going to the Chair's questions around the possibility of a COVID spike and also impact on businesses out with those zones, how confident are you that if there are lost revenues there, that those businesses will be compensated?
There's not, as far as I'm aware, a compensation scheme for businesses outside of the blue zone who are adversely affected by it, whether that's the event itself or anything that flows from that. It's a question we often get asked around about, say, the Commonwealth Games, and it's not something that we, or I think any other city, tend to have.
And the COVID spike, any thoughts on that, if there was one?
I've heard some predictions from some medics over the last couple of days saying there will definitely be a spike. As I say, both governments working with the NHS, with public health and with our environmental health, have a robust plan in place, particularly for delegates. But also, we still have some quite robust rules in place just in general in Scotland, and we are confident that people can stick to that. So nobody can say that there won't be a spike, and if there is, we'll need to manage it as if there was in any time.
Okay, great, thank you. Final question to Ms Fisher, just on Homestay. My sister is hosting, and I'm just checking this because I texted her earlier, a delegate for the charity project Protect Our Winters Europe and a student observer. Obviously there has been a good take-up, but is it too late for Glaswegians to take up the offer of hosting somebody for Homestay? Dr Jones, if you want to come in first, and then I'll come to Ms Fisher. It was to Ms Fisher from the accommodation perspective, but given that you said that delegates did not have accommodation, is that still something that you would want Glaswegians to take up?
We organised the Homestay network ourselves, so this wasn't something that was organised by the city or by the businesses. This was organised by civil society. So I don't know if you want me to answer.
Yes, that would be great, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So when we set up the Homestay network, we did not anticipate it needing to cater for everybody. We really set it up because we know that every COP there is a massive shortage of accommodation that's affordable for people. And we really need this COP as more than any to have the voices heard from people from global south countries, from young people, and from organisations which just don't have the capacity to pay the fees that there are. So that was when we started setting it up about 2 years ago. It's taken us 2 years to get to this point. That was what we had in our minds, that this would really support civil society engagement in COP from those low-income organisations. What we found is because nobody can find accommodation, it's really become a platform for anyone looking for accommodation. And, you know, we're absolutely swamped. I mean, we've managed to get more than 1,000 hosts to sign up, which is amazing, which is really good. And that's rising by about 50 a day. Okay. And it's so fantastic to hear that your mother has signed up. Yes. So it is really good. But the problem is that that's just not enough for the demand, because the demand is almost infinite. Because if you imagine, they're offering their homes as a place for people to stay at, you know, £10 a night max. So there's an infinite demand for accommodation at almost zero prices.
Airbnb quotes at £1,600.
So the way that it works is really that it's not just about a bed for the night. It's not about accommodation. It's actually about relationships. So it's about connecting people in Scotland with people from other parts of the world who are travelling to COP to make a difference, and making that longer term relationship. So I really hope that, you know, this kind of thing that you were talking about will be happening in homes across Glasgow and across Edinburgh and further afield as well, because it's all across the Central Belt. And these little relationships will build up perhaps over a bit of a chat, over coffee in the morning, what's going on at COP today, what, you know, and perhaps a little bit of help here and there. We've heard people who are helping their people find renter bikes, or lending them bikes, or helping them find sort of just logistical things they need. So that kind of relationship, it's not just about what happens when you exchange money, when it's like, I'll give you some money, you'll give me somewhere to stay. This is actually about, you know, we're going to kind of spend some time together. And so I'm really hoping that that will become a legacy for Glasgow.
Okay. Great. That sounds really good. Ms. Fisher, have you anything to add before I go back to Chair?
Yeah, only to say that I think the whole Homestay idea is wonderful. As a Ouija, I might even do it myself, but I might have the day job to do as well. It is important that the whole city takes part, and I think Homestay is a great example of that. You know, our ambitions shouldn't be held back by the availability of registered hotel businesses. Accommodation can take many forms, and in that respect I would absolutely applaud it.
Great. Okay. So Glaswegians, sign up now. Thank you very much,
Great.
Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. Deidre Brock. Deidre.
Great, thanks very much, Chair. Could I ask, I think I'm addressing this to Dr. Jones. The former Minister for Climate Change indicated in a letter to this committee that the UK had secured a fair cancellation deal and reasonable room costs compared to the open market through its contract with MCI. What do you think of that suggestion?
So I haven't been involved at all in the official booking, so I don't know that at all. All I know is there's not been enough space, but that's only an anecdote from the numbers of people that are coming to us via the Homestay network. All right, then, thanks. Mr. Edgar, you certainly have, you've had a lot to do with the Cabinet Office, who are, of course, organising this under President Designate Sharma. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences and contacts with MCI?
MCI have largely been directly engaging with people who are seeking to book with them. We haven't heard reports that people who are in the category of people who would be eligible to book that accommodation have not been able to get it. Although Dr. Jones indicated there were some people who had, and that was the first time I'd heard that this morning. So it's certainly something that would be worth coming back and having a look at. But no, I hadn't heard that so there's a category of people who are eligible to book through that process. I hadn't heard before this morning that people had been unable to get.
Had you raised with the Cabinet Office your concerns? Because there were reports earlier this year, quite some months ago, about things like delegates being asked to book a minimum 12-night stay and then pay their entire bill up front. I just wondered if that was something that you'd engaged with the Cabinet Office over.
We've had a range of discussions with both governments around about accommodation and particularly support we can give to the Homestay network, how we are going to support other people who are coming to the city. But the key relationship is MCI to the Cabinet Office. We haven't really been involved in that discussion. We have had discussions with them, but they've got a specific client group, and we haven't really engaged with that client group.
Okay, so you're not aware of any actions that the Cabinet Office have taken in response to the concerns that were raised, as I mentioned earlier this year, about those upfront costs? Because these are certainly things that delegates have raised with me, and that they say they've not experienced in previous COPs. So I'm just quite interested to hear about how people have responded to concerns that were quite clearly raised earlier this year. Ms. Fisher, I wonder if you maybe could mention what your thoughts are on that.
With any large-scale event like this, it is normal for there to be slightly stricter terms and conditions around accommodation. For example, in Edinburgh during the festival, accommodation is at a premium. So it would be perfectly normal to have a 60-day cancellation term on that.
So that would be your average, what you'd expect in terms of...
Absolutely.
So that's unusual, them saying that the inference in previous articles in the press that there was not going to be allowed to be any sort of cancellation.
No, the cancellation terms and conditions and attrition are perfectly normal in any large-scale event that we would do. Even during Commonwealth Games, it was similar. So I think the difficulty perhaps was for some delegations in terms of making their commitment. As Dr. Jones has alluded to, some tickets are not released until much nearer the time of the event, depending on who's coming, who's not coming, etc. And for some delegations, because of the pandemic, it would have been hard for them to make that decision at certain times. So I do believe it's just as a result of the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Right, okay. I mean, it's difficult to know because we can't see the T's and the terms and conditions because, according to the response from the Minister, those are set by the hotels themselves and aren't within Her Majesty's Government's control to influence. Anyway, right, thanks very much. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Mary Black.
Thank you. And thanks for coming along and giving us your time. Really appreciate it so far. The first thing that I wanted to ask, just to delve a little deeper into the accommodation issues. For example, like the report that Deirdre Brock's just mentioned there, I think it was in the Scotsman, that delegates were being asked to pay, after going through the official portal, were being asked to pay something north of £800, where normally it would be £55 a night, for example. So that was reported back in March. Now, I suppose, Colin, I'll ask you first. You had said that you weren't really aware of delegates not having access to any accommodation. So since those reports have came out in March, I'm presuming that you have looked into it, and have you found that nobody's suffering, or?
No, we haven't tried to look into that.
Right.
And as I say, the delegates are a very important client group, and people being able to come here to take part in the negotiations is very, very important, but they're not our area of responsibility. We've got to make sure the city's running, make sure the transport and traffic's there, and understand that people are coming. We haven't tried to insert ourselves into that discussion.
Right, okay, thank you. Well, just to then ask, is the Homestay network, for instance, I mean, it sounds like a genuinely good civil community-based idea, but as I'm sure most will be aware, it's not necessarily for everyone. And by what I've heard so far, and forgive me if I'm putting words into your mouth, Dr. Jones, but it seems that the Homestay network is now being used as a sticky plaster over what has been issues with accommodation that have been running for some time. Is that correct, or have I just put words in your mouth?
So what I say is we have had a huge interest in it. We've got a waiting list, you might say, of around 3,000 people who haven't yet found accommodation. What we did is, because we were getting so many people applying to be part of the Homestay network or to stay, who weren't really in those kind of groups that would really identified as priorities, you know, we needed to keep places for Indigenous people that come into Glasgow, Global South delegations, which do not book through these official channels because they can't afford it. So they wouldn't ever go near the official hotel channels because we know they go sky high. So we were trying to keep space free for these people who don't book until a few weeks beforehand, perhaps 2 months beforehand maximum, because that's when the badges are allocated. And people weren't booking. You can't book on the hope that you're going to get 10 badges and you actually only get 3 and you're travelling from the Pacific Islands. You know, so these people book a month in advance. Right. So we were trying to make sure there was space for those. But of course, all these people coming in, we had security contractors, we've got translators, we've got like people, you know, businesses coming to take part in business events and things that are trying to get accommodation on the Homestay network. So we sent out a message to the people to say, look, you don't have to book in the first person who gets in touch with you. You can wait and just see who comes, because this is about relationships. It's not just about a financial transaction. You know, wait until you find someone who's got something in common with you or your family. You know, someone who fits the bill of what we're really trying to do here, which is support people who need this space to make their voice heard. Because we don't want our network just accommodating people who are perhaps involved in roundabout things that are happening, and we want it to be those people who are going to make a real difference. But, you know, it's not for us to decide who gets a space, it's peer-to-peer. So you decide who you want to accommodate.
Right. So when you've come across delegates in particular who haven't been able to find accommodation yet, is there any point of contact to try and sort that? Or is it just, you know, I'm getting the sense that people are kind of just scrambling on the ground trying to find things where they are, rather than it being a cohesive, here's where you go, here's the hotels that are already booked out, here's what your options are, you know?
So when there's really important people, so like I had a ministerial delegation who couldn't find accommodation, I sent them to the UK government, and they've got an accommodations department who took that forward. So, you know, if you're official in the sense of you're actually supporting a minister, you can find accommodation through the UK government, and presumably they're helping. But if you're the 99% of people going to the COP, even with a badge, who are not like a ministerial delegation, I think it's really just wherever you can find it.
Right, okay. Thank you. Just to move over to yourself then, Janice, what's your view of the accommodation situation? Could you talk us through what's happened and, in some respects, what's not happened?
As I mentioned earlier, the number of bedrooms available within the campus and within the city itself is limited because COP of its nature is a one of its kind. So I certainly wouldn't encourage the building of hotels just for the sake of one event. You know, that's not sustainable. MCI were chosen as the official accommodation provider. We invited them to an association meeting to share with us the different stakeholders that they would work on behalf of, and also to share with us the stakeholders that they didn't work on behalf of. And then it was down to individual hotels to decide whether or not they were going to work with a partner or work on their own. MCI actually did not take up all the accommodation in the city to allow the market to do what it needs to do in that respect. I did ask MCI, because as you know, they did want to attend today. They just have got another engagement. The average rate that they were able to secure was £190.96, excluding VAT. They had rates ranging from £55 for a standard room, and the highest rate that they secured was £528, and that was for a 5-star boutique hotel suite. So, you know, to achieve an average rate of £190, they've got a wide variety of accommodations available. But they would say themselves that they did not secure enough to satisfy the demand of what was going to be required for the COP. As Dr. Jones said, not everyone will go through the official accommodation provider. But as part of this, and I'm going to read this if you don't mind, just because there's a lot of anagrams and I might get them a bit mixed up. The practice for the COPs is that the UNFCCC will provide financial support for 2 delegates from all eligible parties, plus an additional delegate from least developed countries and small island developing states. Countries can also be eligible to receive financial support from the Trust Fund for participation in the negotiating process. As Dr. Jones said, you know, if they're part of the official delegations, then the UK government will seek to find them accommodation that is suitable for them so that they can take part. But it certainly would not be enough for everyone.
Right. And just lastly then, do you, in the event that COP happens and there are accommodation issues and there's people who aren't able to attend purely because of that, do you think that accountability lies with the MCI or with the Cabinet Office?
MCI are on instruction from the Cabinet Office.
Right. Okay, doke. No, that's good. Oh, sorry, on you go, Dr. Jones.
It was just to add something there, is that we've been highlighting an extreme risk of people showing up in Glasgow without accommodation for many months now to both the UK government, the Scottish Government and Glasgow City Council. We've been trying to secure emergency accommodation in sports halls or other halls, community halls, and have managed to do that. We have weekly meetings we've arranged through a lot of effort to get together weekly meetings between Glasgow City Council, UK Government and Scottish Government on safety and security measures, and that came from us as we demanded these meetings, and eventually we have started having them weekly. At those we've talked about COVID, but also each meeting we always raise this issue that we believe that people are going to show up who do not have accommodation, and there will be emergency situations.
And this is to all the panel.
I don't think we're going to have time, Mary.
Sorry,
because we really are sort of running out. And unless there's
just really quickly, has there been anything to suggest to you that MCI or the Cabinet Office have been taking your concerns seriously and looking into the accommodation issues? For instance, with the official portal showing up that the price is higher than what you had just outlined there, Janice, higher than the £528.
And briefly, if you don't mind, Ms Fisher.
I'm not aware of those conversations, sorry, I can't answer.
Okay, right, thanks. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Edgar, you're Head of Communications with Glasgow City Council.
Yes.
So you're not the Press Secretary to the Leader of the Council. You represent all the political views of the Council and represent the people of Glasgow. Do you therefore agree with the language that she's used about the state of Glasgow in numerous interviews?
I agree. Well, yes, there is
So it's not filthy and it just needs a spruce up. Would you, representing the whole of Glasgow and the political views across the city chambers, do you think, would that be the language you would use?
Well, you're inviting me to disagree with politicians, and if you forgive me, I'll try and sidestep that. My concern in terms of communicating the city recently has been, an impression has grown that the city is uniquely dirty compared with other cities and uniquely dirty compared with this city at earlier moments in time. And again, trying to sidestep politics, neither of those things is true. Glasgow is not the dirtiest city in the world or in the UK or even in Scotland. And again, I don't want to pick a fight with our sister city. And nor is Glasgow dirtier than it has ever been in the past. To be very glib, we had a binman strike in 1975, we had the winter of discontent. There have been other times when the city has had problems with
You've not been hosting world leaders and delegates from across the globe.
Well, nobody is proud of Glasgow being nearly the dirtiest place in Scotland. But again, I think an impression has been allowed to grow that world leaders will somehow be surprised when they come here. And I don't believe that to be the case. I simply don't believe that there are very few world leaders going to come here and think, good Lord, this place is filthier than the place I left. I simply don't believe that.
I think that's almost the problem, because I don't believe that will be the case either, because the bits they see will, as Councillor Aiken said, be spruced up. It's the people who live in Glasgow and have been living here for months and years, who have been living with this now for some time, will see such a change to get it spruced up for the world leaders, and then it will revert back to where it was before.
So I think that's an interesting point. We know that Glaswegians, and I would imagine that this is the case for all citizens. We did some research at the Commonwealth Games about tidying the city up, because the city was not in a good state when we were bidding to host the Commonwealth Games. And we did some research, and Glaswegians were very resistant to the idea of tidying the city in order to host the Commonwealth Games, or in order to win the Commonwealth Games. We put in place a programme called Clean Glasgow, which was very successful. We started to... Scotland's cities will always be near the bottom in terms of the cleanliness rankings, just because cities tend to be dirty. But we did start to move up. We had always been at the bottom. Glasgow was always 32nd out of 32. We were never higher really than 30th or 29th or so, but we started to improve. Context matters. It's not invented to say that the pandemic had an impact. There is a serious public health need to pick up the bins from outside people's houses and outside their back closes. And when you have people, when you can't move people around efficiently because they can't all crowd into the cab of a refuse collection vehicle, or because people are isolating, or because they're genuinely ill, other things do slip. So yes, we were less quick at clearing up graffiti than we had previously been, because we were collecting domestic waste. We were less quick at picking up fly tipping because we were clearing up domestic waste. But I understand, and I don't want people to deny the reality of their own eyes, but these things do get measured. And the people who measure these things say we are not uniquely dirty in time or in comparison with other cities. We are recycling more. We are receiving fewer reports of fly tipping. Now, that's not to suggest for 1 second that you can't get your phone out, walk around the city and take some photographs of fly tipping, because fly tipping happens. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to have a process for dealing with fly tipping. So again, very important for me not to be political. I don't agree with those people who suggest that the city is uniquely dirty, either compared with ourselves in the past or with other cities today.
Dr Jones mentioned how people could be staying in Edinburgh, and that was less than an hour away that people had travelled during the Paris COP. So that sounds okay, the 45-minute journey. If you're out with Glasgow, you're maybe in Edinburgh. It's going to be absolutely useless if the roads are blocked and the trains are off. I mean, how worried are you about that? I know you said some things keep you awake at night, but there's just no point people staying in Edinburgh if they're not going to be able to get into Glasgow.
If people can't get the train from Edinburgh to Glasgow, and the trains are cancelled, then they can't get here. That's absolutely the case. I would suggest that's why the unions have chosen to strike at this time, because trade unions will use their point of maximum industrial leverage. And for the transport workers and for local government workers in general, because of course the local government negotiations are national, not local, although they're our employees.
But it would just be an absolute disaster. People coming from all over the world think, right, we've got accommodation for COP, we're only 45 minutes away, and they're not going to get in through the door. It
will be a serious problem for those people if they've come from around the world and they're only 45 minutes away. If they can't get a bus or an Uber, then yeah, that's going to be a real problem for them.
Do you think they should be getting Ubers to come to a climate change conference?
Well, that's another really interesting point. So again, you do see a lot of discussion, don't you, saying, well, if these people really cared about the environment, they wouldn't fly all the way here from Washington. And if the president-designate really cared about the environment, he wouldn't be flying all the way around the world to carry out negotiations with people. I have to say, I reject that analysis, because I think while getting here is not an environmentally friendly thing to do if you have to fly here, and coming here by car from Edinburgh or Aberdeen or wherever else is not an environmentally friendly thing to do, we need this conference to work, and people need to be here in person. So again, it's not the responsibility of Glasgow City Council, but I reject the kind of superficial idea that Alok Sharma shouldn't be flying around the world to negotiate, and people shouldn't drive here if they have to.
With what the President-designate has done in the months leading up to COP, and people having to travel to get here, than people actually in Scotland, within an hour of the venue, having to hire a car rather than using public transport, which we as a city, as a country, should be able to lay on.
No, I agree with you. I was only making the point that if people have to drive through here from Edinburgh because of the strike, some people will say, well, if they really cared about the environment, they wouldn't drive. Well, no, they need to get here to have these discussions. So if they regrettably have to drive, then they still have to come here. It's important that they're here, is my view.
Dr Jones and Ms Fisher, you've both mentioned very clearly how previous experience with COP has shown that delegates continue to require accommodation up to very close to the start of the event. You're both nodding in agreement. Dr Jones, you said you had raised the extreme risk of a lack of accommodation for delegates, people with passes, with a number of organisations, including Glasgow City Council. You've done that on numerous occasions. Were you as shocked as I was, therefore, that the leader of the City Council believes every delegate has accommodation?
So what we were really raising was the risk that people would come as part of the march, for example, or the middle of COP. There's usually an alternative summit called the People's Summit taking place, and this is when the most people come to Glasgow. Yep. And that was the point we were raising, was we think people will show up. They do at other COPs, they bring perhaps a tent, or they expect to sleep sort of in some shelter somewhere, and they don't understand that we have a climate that it's not friendly to people who are doing that. And we know there are groups travelling from Spain, from Italy, from Germany, from France, coming up on trains and things.
But sorry,
and we're really worried about that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's very legitimate. But there are also people who are not coming with a tent, who are coming with a delegate's badge on to get into the conference venue, who, in evidence to this session, the leader of the council hosting this event has said has got accommodation, and your evidence is contrary to that. You are saying there are people who are delegates who will only get their accreditation, you know, a couple of weeks or days now before the event. They don't have accommodation yet, do they? And these aren't people who will be on the marches. These are people going into the various zones within the COP26 venues.
So I suppose from what we know, all we know is the anecdotal things that we're seeing through the accommodation platform. So there isn't any central point at which people go to, and I'm aware of, to sort of raise this. There might be, sort of obviously if they're very official, like they're the government delegations, there's all these processes for paying for accommodation for certain people and finding accommodation. But really it's the importance of COP for us as civil society is making sure that civil society has that place to take part. And I think that's where the lack of accommodation is. It's in these civil society groups who do have a badge, but haven't booked yet, and maybe travelling from very, very far away.
And that's out with UK and Europe. I mean, this is worldwide. People coming here expecting to do what they believe is their civic duty, to make the case here in Glasgow, who will be expecting some form of accommodation, and based on your earlier evidence, could be sleeping in a gym hall.
I think these are different people. So nobody travels to COP with a badge and plans to sleep in a gym hall. That's for people who come on the march or come
but they
to
are
take part in
delegates.
No, these would be the unofficial things around COP. So there's perhaps 25,000 people who will have badges to go to COP. I'm not sure the exact number. And then we expect there to be many thousands more who come to Glasgow to take part in the march, alternative activities around COP, like the People's Summit, like other sort of fringe events. And these are the ones that we've been communicating to say only travel to Glasgow if you've got accommodation, and also to mobilise closer to where you live. So go to the London March or your local march. So we've been trying to, that's the worries that we have, is about these people, because they tend to want to be where the action is. And even if we communicate, please don't come unless you've got accommodation, or please mobilise closer to where you live, many people will still travel to Glasgow because they want to be here.
We're going to have to wind up this session, so if any last questions...
No, that's fine, Chair.
Is that okay? Well, thank you for that. That was a fantastic session, and thank you for your time this morning, and obviously to Councillor Aitken too, who said to leave for other pressing business. But for this formal part of our proceedings in Glasgow, we're grateful for you for turning up today. I think there was a couple of things outstanding which I'm pretty certain you'll provide us with. And I can see Mr. Edgar shaking his head in that, so we'll look forward to securing it. So, but in the meantime, order. Great. Thanks, guys. Nice. Thanks again, Colin. Yeah.
This is one-to-one. It's one family.